Good morning and welcome to Snake Find Your Truth. I'm your host, Alison Crosthwait, and I'm here to talk about finding your truth and psychedelics and how they intersect and how they may not intersect. It's great to be here with you. And today I'm going to do something a little different than I've done before. I spent the weekend at the Catalyst Psychedelics Conference in Kingston, Ontario. It's a conference around the Canadian psychedelic industry. And there were a number of things that came up that I thought that I did allude to last time around the war on drugs, around legalization, that I thought would be really valuable to talk about. And it's going to be a bit of a smorgasbord today. I'm not making one argument or another argument, but I'm going to put out some things and I'll definitely tell you what I think about the whole thing. So, the psychedelic space right now is very, very, very interesting because there's a lot happening. And it's kind of like there's 1,000 different conversations happening in the same room. So you've got physicians who are working on clinical trials in various areas. You've got startups, pharmaceutical startups, clinic startup companies. So real startup ventures. Many people in both of these groups have minimal, if any, experience with psychedelics themselves. Then you've got people in more sort of academic streams who are developing psychedelic training programs. Again, their experience with psychedelics definitely varies. And then you've got the undergrounders like me who are working outside the system. So you've got a lot of different energies coming out and a lot of different intentions. You've got financial, you've got spiritual, you've got mental health, you've got legacy building. I think probably the biggest surprise that should not have been a surprise to me, but was the amount of ego. And I'm not the type of person to kind of like, I'm not the anti-ego spiritual person, not at all. We all have ego. We need it. But when we become driven by our desire to be special and to make this special impact so that our life is worth living, we trap ourselves in something that's not ultimately going to be satisfying because we're not special and we are special. It's beyond words. We live. And the trappings of trying to build legacy and be powerful and rich and like the pull to define ourselves in these ways creates problems. That creates problems, right? And we're seeing that in the psychedelic space as much as anywhere. And there's a bit of a gold rush mentality for sure. So it's very interesting to be in that room. I, of course, work with psilocybin primarily, and so it is a Schedule 1 substance in the United States and Canada. And Health Canada has decided that it has a high potential for abuse. And this is very interesting. And, from my position, I can kind of say whatever I want. And it gives me the opportunity to think and speak quite independently. And what I would say to this high potential for abuse, nonsense. Nonsense. Have you ever known a mushroom addict? Now, certainly, there are people who, through mushrooms and more through acid, have pretty negative experiences. There's no doubt about it. And there are people who would have benefited from less acid. There is no doubt that that has been abused. Mushrooms, on the other hand, you see it less. They're certainly not addictive. And Health Canada talks about the risk of bad trips and flashbacks. And it really is quite paternalistic that they're trying to avoid negative experiences that in general, unless very much abused, do not have long-term impacts. And in fact, used in a healing container, these bad trips are exactly what we need to process. It's that we're using them badly, not that there is something inherently wrong with the substance itself. And there are so many, it's just kind of fascinating because the mushrooms themselves are forageable. They're forageable in our climate, in our ecosystem. So what the government has said is that that particular forageable plant, we're not talking about laboratory, we're not talking about cross-border, we're not talking about any organized drug situation, which also there's a big argument to be made that they're completely racist. I'm going to talk about that in a second. We're talking about forageable plants being made illegal. Now, this is fascinating to me because peanut allergies are serious. People die from peanut allergies. And personally, having a child with a peanut allergy is probably one of the most nightmarish things I could imagine. To constantly be afraid that your child would be exposed to peanuts, which are friggin' everywhere. Alcohol. How many people do you know? I mean, I'm one of them. I've not used alcohol well in my life. It has not served me. And while there's maybe a place for nice wines and liqueurs in certain situations, in general, it is very harmful to our health and emotional and mental well-being. And yet we can access alcohol easily. And there's an industry of people sick and dying from diseases caused by alcoholism. Plus, drunk driving is a leading cause of death. Let's talk about tobacco. Very similar situation. A master teacher plant badly used, causing severe health problems. So if the government is really interested in protecting our health, then it seems to me that certain substances would be much more protected. The other piece that was really interesting at the conference was MAIDS and assisted dying, the assisted dying program. There was a Vancouver physician who said that the MAIDS system is so easy to access now. So it's like running smoothly, the whole process. If you submit your paperwork for assisted dying, it's quite easy, if it's justified, for you to get that help in leaving your physical form. And they said that because the system is so well running now, 8% of deaths in Vancouver are assisted. 8%. And yet, to get the special access exemption, sorry, I said that wrong, to get the Section 56 exemption, to use psilocybin at the end of life is extremely difficult. So as the saying goes, we have the right to die, but not the right to try. And something seems fundamentally wrong about this, that a dying person has access to cigarettes, tobacco, and cannabis, but does not have access to a naturally growing mushroom. Or if they do, it is considered a crime. Also, the naturally growing mushroom, nobody dies from it unless they have an accident, and it's not physiologically addictive, unlike other substances. So there are some very deep injustices and nonsensical aspects of our current system that I was just reminded of this weekend, and I thought would be helpful to mention when we're thinking about, how are these things going to play out. Then it's easy to get sucked into the mental health argument. And this is certainly how cannabis went. We started with medical marijuana. We started with exemptions. And we moved towards legalization. Will that happen with psychedelics? It may. And this may be a legitimate path forward. Excuse me, I have something in my mouth. This may be the way that we should go. But it's also a bit of a rabbit hole, because the minute we start to think about psilocybin medically, we have all the pharma companies running in to create the products. And we have things like doctors being able to prescribe it, and we open a can of worms. They say that right now, 1 in 6 MDs does prescribe medical marijuana. But cannabis is a very different animal than psilocybin. Very different plant, to be more accurate. And if we had MDs prescribing psilocybin, I can't quite imagine what would happen. It's clear to me that the medical establishment does not understand the power of the medicines. And really, the only way to understand it, understand is a laughable word. Because every time I journey, I'm like, I don't understand anything. We don't understand anything. We do not understand anything. Understanding is not even the thing. So to have people prescribing medications that they don't experience themselves and don't know how they work and prescribing them as a medical model is, I think, just like a whole rabbit hole we don't need to go into. Ultimately, we have the human right to access the plants that we live with. Bottom line, the government isn't protecting us from poisonous berries. Why are they protecting us from hallucinogenic mushrooms? And I'm on a path of learning the details to be able to speak much more educated about this and really be able to summarize it in my own words, which shows you've learned something. But everything I'm learning about the war on drugs is so appalling that there were beliefs about people of color, different ethnicities, and what they were doing with drugs and what they were doing to people with drugs, and that the laws were created for extremely bigoted reasons that have no basis in our current reality. None whatsoever. And essentially, you don't have to look any further than the gun laws in the United States and their over-reliance on the Constitution to see that in this continent, at least, we way over-rely on laws created by this portion of the population. And this portion that really needs to take a back seat now and listen. Renewal is necessary. And that may not be a pragmatic approach, but I believe it is the truth. So what else did I want to say to you? Yeah. Oh my gosh, so many pieces. I want to talk about epistemology. I love that word. That word is how we know things. Someone on LinkedIn the other day, I posted about some of the benefits of working with microdosing, and I'm always very qualified. I say, well, for the right person at the right time without the contraindications, blah, blah, blah. And it's just a LinkedIn post. It's not me saying you can do it. It's just information, right? And he responded to me, but are there any studies, And, I sent him to Johns Hopkins. They have a very good psilocybin study and center. But ultimately, if a bunch of people at an Ivy League medical school, in their limited ways of studying these medicines, decides that these medicines work, that means nothing to me. I mean, it's a nice to have, I suppose. But I'll tell you what a red flag is for me. When a prospective client wants too much research, because that's giving someone else a lot of power over yourself, and it misses the path of these particular medicines. These particular medicines are about empowerment and connection to the earth and connection to ourselves. They're not about a doctor telling us what's right for us. And I would never allow a doctor to tell me what psychotropic medicine was right for me. In fact, at this stage in my life, I would only allow a doctor to be one of the epistemological approaches that I took if I was facing disease. How we know. Is it the scientific method? And I'll say more about that in a second. Is it our bodies? Is it our communities? Is it our elders? Is it nature? I love the saying, as above, so below. As above, so below. And I interpret that statement as in nature, so within. Everything I need to know about how life operates is exhibited in the seasons outside my window. That's not to say that I can't co create with other people's expertise, but it has to resonate with my deep body knowing of how life really is. And I'm not interested in fighting the truth of life. I'm just interested in living it. And that's where I just have discovered satisfaction is just in the moments of living it, of living life, not trying to make it into something. So epistemology is really important. And we tend to privilege the scientific epistemology, evidence-based. And let me tell you, after 2.5 days of listening to evidence-based, I mean, it's not really, is it? I do think John Hopkins does a good job. I think they do a decent job. But I heard a very prominent person, probably the most famous person in the psilocybin field, give a study that was so riddled. And I'm not a scientist, but I could see was so riddled with flaws in its construction and so clearly designed for a certain outcome that it was really discouraging, quite frankly. We have to be much more critical thinking about who funded the study, what question is asked, who are they studying? Are they studying women, people of color, people with disabilities, so-called disabilities? Like, are they studying people throughout the life cycle? These are big, big, big questions. And what questions are they asking? I saw a microdosing study that said, they gave people a microdose of LSD, I think it was 8 times over 2 months. They came in once a week, and then they had a placebo group. And then they say, microdosing doesn't do anything. Well, of course it doesn't. Like, yeah, sometimes people feel better. Sometimes they do feel better. And that's all they need. But these medicines are not just here to make us feel better and keep living in a delusion. These medicines are here to help us strip away all the stories, all the things we've been told about who we are, all the separations from who we are, and to allow us to live. They love us, these medicines. They want us to live. And every single person needs support in the discovery of that wisdom for their own selves. They need support in the empowerment of themselves. And it's unlikely that microdosing one of these medicines all by yourself is going to result in very much of anything. And the idea that it would is so incredibly flawed. So while the pharmaceutical companies can race to create magic pills and special formulations, and my formulation's the best, to the extent that we're doing this, we're not going to get where we need to get. We will ride a wave, and the wave will not be pretty. And I could go on and on about some other aspects of this wave that we're seeing right now. I don't think any of it's accidental that psychedelics are coming to the forefront now, but I also don't think that this current wave is supporting what we think it's supporting. And I'll leave with one more question as someone who used to be employed in the mental health field and is no longer. What does mental health mean? Is what we're after people who live in the system without pain? Is that the intention of the mental health care system? That we don't have people reporting suffering? That's interesting. Because the way that we've been designed to live, no matter who we are, creates suffering. Because our society is not free. And injustice is systemic. And no matter where you are on whatever side of that, we're not free until we become free. So, what you're really saying in the mental health care system is we want people numbed by whatever it might be, such that they do not express pain, because when they express pain, we need a mental health care system for them. When they're suicidal, we need a mental health care system for them. When they're addicted, we need a mental health care system for them. And I actually don't believe that this is consciously designed. I believe this is designed from our collective unconscious that says, don't worry, don't cry. It's all okay, because we can't stand each other's feelings. That's what I think is actually going on. So thanks for joining me today for this romp through some of the issues around legalization. And I'm not a lawyer. And if the right strategy is to go through the medical exemption that they're developing now, the special access program and the medical exemptions, I'm all for it. And I certainly believe that all patients struggling with mental health issues should have access to these medicines. But ultimately, this is a civil rights and a human rights issue that we should not lose sight of. Okay, I will see you in 2 weeks. If you're watching this and there's anything you would like me to address or go deeper on, I would be very happy to receive your comments. Alison at AlisonCrosswait.com, or comment here or wherever you like. Instagram, Alison Crosthwait. I'd love to hear what you're thinking, and that helps me create the next episode of Snake, Find Your Truth.